In a moment, we are going to move ourselves into some overnight reflections, just sort of what have you been noodling on, what's coming to mind. I've already had a couple of conversations this morning. I know that people have things that they would like to say. Process-wise, I'm going to do a little bit of a sort of check-in with where we are, and then we're going to have some people get us started with the overnight reflections, some subset of the panel that we had yesterday. They may choose to sit up here. They may not. Like, we're going to let people do what they want to do. And then we're going to get back at the process, right? That'll be a part of the process of figuring out where we want to go from here. What do we want to do? What ideas have you been working on? How might we collectively, the roundtable specifically, you individually, like, what does it mean to have had this conversation and turn it into something? We were yesterday several times, we don't want to be here in another 10 years from now having the same conversation. We will be having a conversation in 10 years from now. Like, healthcare, health, well-being will still require some caretaking at a high level policy, like that will still. However, I think what we're saying is, can we have moved on from this particular part of this particular conversation? So what are the things we might be able to do in order to make that happen? I think that that's sort of where we are. And people have some thoughts about that, which is cool. Can we pull up that first? The projector is on. It's coming. All right. So one of the things we talked about yesterday was this idea of hosting. This idea that what is going to happen among a group of people is co-created by those people. And one of the reasons that we use the term hosting is because it evokes the idea of hospitality. And all of us, because of our cultures of origin, our ethnicities, our backgrounds, changes that we made in our lives, like that hospitality, the way that we show up in hospitable ways are different. The way we extend hospitality to people is different. And we want to embrace those differences. How you may host this space in this room might be different than the way that I would, and that's good. That's an intentional thing. We want to bring all of those different ways of thinking and being into the space. So as we remind ourselves of our core principles of our definition of hosting, it's our collaborative commitment to building an equitable, thriving growth environment. One of the key pieces of that is that we're showing up in ways that are different, and that is good. Which leads us to the idea of honorable collaboration. I can honor someone's way of extending hospitality. I can enjoy that and also bring my way of extending hospitality. I can honor people differently. And then we got to be open to learning and adapting. And I suspect that yesterday, many of us did a lot of learning, and I saw a lot of openness to learning. The hard work is then figuring out what to do with the learning. How does that adapt you individually? How do we collectively adapt given what we've learned? Right. So being open to learning is a really key piece of the equation, and then you got to be open to figuring out then what do we do about it? Which really brings us to the shared accountability piece. Like, what is it? How are we going to do this together? How are we going to co-own? How are we going to work together to make it happen? Which then sort of reminds us, and I'm hoping that people agree we did a good job yesterday of tending to our relationships along the way, really paying attention to our humanity and the humanity of the people that we are looking to do this work with and for. Kristen and I had an overnight reflection, and it is in the spirit of offering. Again, because a lot of our work is related to hosting, we're not quite there yet, Fisher. That's okay. Because a lot of our work is related to equity, we do spend a lot of time helping people do what Dr. Adams said yesterday, which is thinking about the definition of equity and helping people get on the same page. So here's an offering. Here is the way that we have found a useful shorthand. So we have found that the clearest way of helping people understand what equity is to think about the word as it's used outside of a diversity, equity, and inclusion setting. So for instance, if you think about the word equity when it comes to someone's home, if the house is worth $500,000, if the bank, mortgage company has $300,000 of that, we would say that the remaining 40%, the $200,000, is the equity that a person has in their home. It turns out the word equity is used in situations where there is shared ownership, where there are multiple owners. Like if you think about the stock market, which is also called the equity market, we call it that because people have shares, equity shares, parts of ownership of a company. And the key is when they buy parts of those shares, like parts of the company, they get to help direct the company. Literally, those shares allow them to select the board of directors. Now we can talk about like how effective that process is, but conceptually, like that's the idea. When people buy in, they get to help direct. So we think about equity as shared ownership. We're trying to get people on the sidelines and the margins. They have value. We're trying to help allow them to buy in. When we do that, though, they have to be able to help set the direction. Now, this is really important because frequently when we talk about equity, and again, I think Dr. Adams talked about this yesterday, like people's thinking about that feels like a takeaway. It feels like somehow there's one pie and we're trying to divvy it up. And equity in every other context is exactly the opposite. It's additive every time. Like, I don't know, Jane and I, we're going to start a company. Jane is awesome. So Jane is the CEO. It's called Jane, and a little bit of James. That's what the company's called. And so we've done a good job. The company is worth $1 million. Good job, CEO Jane. Thank you so much for all of your leadership. I was happy to contribute, participate. And Jane's like, we want to go bigger. I'm like, hey, Jane, you know what we can do? We can go to the stock market. We can do an IPO. Jane's like, yes. Yeah, let's do that. And we take our company to the stock market. We ring the bell. We do the whole thing. And at the end of the first day, we are now worth $100 million. Like the company, Jane, and a little bit of James, is now worth $100 million. Well, in order to do that, we had to sell some of the ownership of the company. We don't still get to own 100% of the company and also sell, like have other people have equity. Like they now own some of the company. They get to help, like we have set a shared vision, they get to buy in, but they now get to help redirect. Here's the thing, we may own a smaller percentage of the company, but we started with $1 million and now it's worth $100 million. So our percentage may have gone down, but the value has gone up. And that is what equity does. It is to increase the value. Right? We're trying to get more people to buy in. That increases the value. Now, we heard some great examples of this. Like when Jennifer said, and when other people say, like Jennifer is a real colleague, Jennifer has shared ownership over what we're doing. Like that is equity. It's the shared ownership piece. Equity is not in the outcome, it's in the process. So when we look at a relatively familiar image, this would be the Q. This would be the Q. Nope, we're good. We're good. When people see this image, some confusion sometimes happens because we frequently say, well, this is what equality is, and then that's what equity is. And I guess what we're trying to say is, I don't know if that's what equity is just by looking at the picture. Because equity requires shared ownership. If someone owns these boxes and they come up and say, I have decided that these boxes are wrong for you. And I'm going to move the boxes for you. This outcome here may be a better outcome. Like if you ask it, is it better? They may say yes, but it's still not equity. Equity requires shared ownership. First and foremost, over the definition of success. Is the definition of success to be able to see over the fence? Many of you have seen other versions of this where there's no fence or they're in the stands, or like the reason for those things is unless you know what their definition of success is, unless they have shared ownership over that definition of success, it isn't equity. And then they have to have shared ownership over what are the barriers they are seeing to that success. So if their definition of their barriers are the boxes are organized poorly, and then we can have shared ownership over how we fix that problem, then this is an equitable outcome. Shared definition of success, see over the fence, barriers that were identified by the people facing the barriers. That is an equitable outcome. It is shared ownership. If someone else has some ownership over those boxes, then we now have shared ownership over trying to figure out how we're going to organize them. Like it is still shared ownership. Like people in this room see things that other people may not see. People that we're looking to work with and serve may see things that we may not see. It's a shared ownership piece, which is why the hosting piece says we got a honorable collaboration, open to learning and adaptation, and then we have shared accountability to figure it out. So our shorthand then tends to be equity and shared ownership. So as we're thinking through, like, again, this is one of our overnight reflections, is that as people have used that term and as we've tried to figure out how to get to the real, like part of it, even trying to decide what we want to do whenever we go back, we have to take into account shared ownership. What are the people that we're looking to do this work with and for? Like, what do they see? When we talk about the language, like what is the language that they use? We have to take a shared ownership approach to making that work. So that's, again, from an overnight reflection standpoint, that's one of the things that Kristen and I were talking about is, it may be useful to offer as a contribution into the room, a way of thinking about this. It isn't the only way, but we've definitely found it helps clarify and crystallize how we can then move into equitable practices. What does it look like to do equity, to be equitable, by really thinking through that shared ownership approach? All right, so that's our overnight reflection, is that offering, that contribution hopefully is helpful. And again, we're open to different perspectives, right? Like people have other ways of thinking about it. That's great, right? We want to learn with and from one another. All right. So, are we good? How are we doing? Doing okay? Yeah? So, I am going to invite, I have microphones. Is there anything else I need to do before we shift? We're getting back into our path forward conversation. So, do you all want to come back up? Yeah? Dr. T, Shoma, yeah? All right, excellent. So we've seen these folks before. We're super excited to have them. Dr. T is on her way. And so we just want to start with like, what were you all thinking about overnight? And I want to call out my friend Fisher. So S. Fisher Qua, who is helping with the online stuff, is a serious facilitator in his own right and does a lot of work around liberating structures. And so frequently, one of the things he called out yesterday is frequently when we ask people to do this, they like have this really nice conversation and they talk to you all. And then you all go into small groups and then they have a small group conversation and it like gets really real here when it's just y'all talking. So maybe we can like skip to the real part and y'all can have a conversation and we'll sort of listen in and jump in. Is that okay? Uh-oh. All right. Yes. That's right. Hospitality. How are we going to sit to make? Yes. Okay. All right. So we're going to let this run for a little bit, 20, 30 minutes. I'm going to suggest you all, you don't even have to wait to the end. If you have thoughts, you want to jump in because somebody said something, raise a hand, and we'll get a mic to you and we'll just sort of make it happen. Is that fair? Let's begin it together this morning. We good? All right. Who wants to get the party started?
We get the party started. He has his mic. Oh, yeah, I'm the
I think we protect what we love. I'd like to know what we love. I know what I love. I know who I love. I love children and the potential of children. And in the world I inhabit, I'd like to make sure that every kid, everywhere, has a shot to realize their full potential. And I know we're going to talk today about how we organize and what we look at to move a movement forward and all of this. I'd like to know who is at the center of that and what we are centering to move forward. And for me, as I look at the wisdom of the Pop Health Roundtable with other filial aspects of the National Academies of Science, Education, and Medicine, and NAS, and what we know as human beings, that caring for the health of women and girls and making sure that every mother has everything she needs to ensure that a child can rise well, first 1,000 days, nurturance, ready to learn, read, be cared for, feeling loved, and everything we know through young adulthood, like service year, matters. And I believe if we could knit together our love for our children, recognize the importance to my life of your children and vice versa, all of us, and make that commitment, we actually could transform this country through caring for our children by knowing who we love and protecting who we love. That's my first start.
So I thought about, when you asked that, obviously about my family, about our immigrant story. And I mentioned this in the small chat yesterday, but about how much faith we have in democracy to work. And I've been a part of movements, when I think about the immigrant rights movement, where it's stalled. And this formula that we have for democracy stalls because people organize, people share their stories, and then the change never comes. And that can weigh heavily on people who are most affected, on my family, etc. And when I think about organizing yet again, right? Like every morning we wake up and yet again, we're going to do this thing and we're going to talk to youth and we're going to get them excited about this democratic process. We need to do right every time by this promise, because we're at a time where the fabric of democracy is in danger. I mean, the things we see politically across the country, we're so divided and people are so ready to be insightful that when you have young people, groups of people who still believe in this process, I think we need to do everything we can to set them up for success. Like, we can't miss these moments, because every time these groups of people organize and put all of their lives on the line and everything, and when they don't succeed, there is that just danger that the flame of hope that they have in the country is just, it can go out. And so the role that we play as advocates is just so important, because it's the social contract that we have to keep also making people believe in, even when our own, we don't always win our own battles. So when we think about like movements and we think about the people we love, thinking about how everyone involved who participates in these movements, they have family and they have people they love too, and that's why they do what they do. So how do we set us up for success? How do we best do that? And I think that this conversation in this room is a great start, but those are just things to keep in mind.
Thank you for saying that. I've been at this for 25 years. Started as a youth, thinking about these things, filled with so much optimism for what's possible. And over 25 years have watched amazing things happen, seeing both my family, that's as an immigrant family, both the incredible blessings of this country. I couldn't believe there were things like libraries, or that our housing unit had a plot of land that we could grow our own vegetables in. And at the same time have seen just the incredible pain that we allow our friends and neighbors and fellow members of this community to live in. That the 3/4 of people who work in our factories and in our farms aren't people that we break bread with, who don't feel welcome in those same public parks and don't have a plot of land to grow their own food. We marginalize people of color and indigenous communities in neighborhoods and disinvest in them or in reservations, and we don't uphold the treaties we have in those reservations. And both of these things are true about who we are. And so I'm in this place where I hold hope for what it means for us collectively to choose to be part of the founding of a new America, to not accept that what was founded hundreds of years ago is what we have to accept, or that we can't be part of creating a new. And I don't think we're very serious about it for most of us who are in this room. I think we're way too comfortable in the power and privilege that we have. And for most of us, it's academic. It doesn't feel clear about what that pain really is, or what it means for that child to not have hope, or for that youth to lose hope for their future, or for the future of democracy in this country. And I don't think we're really going to be able to get there. There's things that we can do tactically, like get clear about how to move the power and the money and the narrative and all of those things. But until we get real about what it's going to take from each of us, I don't think we're really going to move the needle. And I say that as someone who has deeply connected and has been working on the underlying parts of how you move all of those pieces. And so I think that's what I've been struggling with for the last 2 days. How serious are we? Every system is perfectly designed to obtain the results that it gets, and we are the system. This is happening on our watch. And so what does it mean for us to be in love with our friends and neighbors? What does it mean for that love to be strong enough for us to cede ground, to give up some ownership of the process and the outcomes so that we can have so much more together. And what does it mean for me always to be able to make sure that as we have these conversations, that the groups whose leadership is absent in the room is able to be part of change, creating that change. Because because the best part of my job is being proximate to those communities, and their brilliance and resilience would put us all to shame. Their courage and ability to withstand is what we need to follow. And I think that's what I wonder how we take next steps forward that centers that, or whether we just recreate the power structures with maybe some wins in narrative or some wins in policy.
I thought that was so profound. I just want to sit in that for just a second. If folks don't mind, can we just sit in what she said? I just thought that was. So, yeah, a little bit closer. Gotcha. So I have to say that I love where this conversation started. Thank you, Tyler, for starting us off on that journey, because I wasn't thinking we were going there. But when you pulled us there, it was the exact right place for us to be. I think that you name the thing that I think binds most of us here together who are trying to figure out our place in the change we want to see, and that is love. And it's the conversation that is hardest to have in the hallowed halls of academia, of bureaucratic institutions, of philanthropy and funding partners, that we don't get to have this as a founding sort of centering conversation, so that we operate out of that. So I just want to name the thing that was wonderful to start there. And I loved how you talked about bringing young people into it, who the brilliance of young people, and all of us at some point have been young, but the brilliance of youth is that you don't yet know. You haven't been talked out of your passion yet. You haven't been mortgaged out of the freedom of life, right? You haven't figured out that there's a way that you got to conform yet, that life kind of, that the course of life of trying to survive here can just squash the hopes and dreams that you have. You haven't sort of figured out yet that part of it. And so you get to experience a different kind of optimism that we as adults, right, have had to figure out in order to make the juggle work, to get food on the table, to get the next job promotion, to be able to buy a house, to pay for the car, and all the things that come along with that. And I just love that you name that kind of, not only just that optimism, but also the disillusion that can come when it's not met at an early enough stage with something that gives it an opportunity to flourish. And I think on that, we as the adults have fallen down. as a mother of two teenagers who is always trying to figure out how to get some of that, right? To how to keep the optimism of social justice and social change alive, right? In the midst of TikTok and all the other things that are just in their everyday awareness. I'm just keenly aware of like, as a parent, I feel this urgency of trying to like, but we got to keep the movement going, and my sons are like, oh, mom, right? Because they want to just lean into being, teenagers, to just lean into the joy of not having to think about the heaviness of the world just yet. I think about that when because they are teenagers, they're getting ready to go out into the world, and I think about that all the time. What is it? What else do I need to do to prepare these two young African-American men for the world when my oldest is 17 and started to drive? Like, what is it? We've done what to do if you're stopped by police. We've done how you have to behave when you're in a store. And quite frankly, there are white women around you, right? Let's just say it. How you have to behave when you're in environments where, right, you're being watched and looked at differently. How you have to behave when we live in Florida, when your political viewpoints are different from most of the folks around you, and how you need to censor yourself to some extent to be able to survive in that context. Like, what is it that I have to do to get you ready for the world that is harsh? And what you just named was, we got to also be better at how we not only prepare youth, but meet them at the level of, there's something possible here that's bigger than understand the 10 and 2 on the steering wheel when, the cop is at the side of the door, like there's something bigger than that we have to be able to prepare our kids for. And I so appreciate it, you naming that. And what you said, I feel like I found a sort of sister in consciousness here, just in terms of wanting so badly for things to change and realizing that we're in a space that, I love what you said, we're not always sure that this is that our hearts are in the right place, but our ability to deliver that, I need to sit with that. That wasn't where I came in this morning, but I'm so glad we arrived here. What I was sitting with this morning, I think, was about where James started this morning, was more about, okay, we've had a good discussion on day one. Now how, like in the 4 hours that we have this morning, okay, how do I make sure that something comes out of this that's meaningful, that we can touch, feel, right? That we can say is meaningful enough that it not only warrants all of our time, but builds on the productive energies that we have for something better. What is it that we can do, create in this space while we're all here today that sends us home, not only just optimistic about something better, but working towards something together. And I don't know what that is, but I appreciate it when you were talking, James, about just equity. I think we brandish it around just like we brandish around the ideas of democracy as a thing. But what does that mean? I think that's what folks are struggling with. Like, there are definitions of it, but in terms of operationalizing equity so that it actually functions, what does that mean? I think that was a question you were asking about democracy. How do we operationalize it so that it actually functions for the benefit of what we needed to do? And I want to say that all of us have not done a great job of doing that. And I have to say, in my practice, I'm constantly trying to get people to sort of make that, not just the vision of that real, but the reality of that real. And because we haven't seen it, it's hard for folks to imagine it and to create it. So I guess for me, I'm thinking really hard about operationalizing those terms. I think the way we teach democracy is totally wrong. We teach it as a fait accompli. We did it. 1776. Da, 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 da. We achieved it, and we didn't. That was not it. It is a process. And we are working on that process. And it was a process created by folks who weren't really all that sure they wanted democracy for everybody. And so I think we teach it in the wrong way. I think we don't tell our young people that it's not a fait accompli. It's not something that was given to you at birth. It's not something that is done. It's something that we're still trying to get to. It's an idea. And if we don't figure out how to operationalize that idea, you won't have it. You don't live in a democracy unless you go out and grab it. So I guess for me, I'm thinking about that, about operationalizing that, about making that real for folks, about encouraging us to do that walk. And in my daily life, think about how to bring others along on that journey. What does it take to get people excited about the journey? It's not a bad thing that we have to go out and get democracy, right? It's an opportunity. We get to create the damn thing in the way in which it should be working. And we get to say no, right, to the stuff that is not helpful and is a disservice. In the health space, we get to create that. What does that really look like? And I think, to echo, I think both your concern, but also your optimism, my attitude is, what are we going to break together and rebuild in the way that we know serves the folks that we, right, are trying to figure out.
Thank you for all of that. I switch between where my heart is, and then I think back to working on Capitol Hill and the realities of there is so much that needs to happen in order to build a movement, but then to get it through a finish line legislatively, there is this whole, it's like a whole other arena where you actually, where I think something was mentioned yesterday, but you actually have enemies and you have to be able to confront them. And when we passed the Inflation Reduction Act, which included like the second most major reform to healthcare since the ACA, which was to allow HHS to negotiate drug prices under Medicare for seniors, they had so much against them. There was a policy that made sense. It was a policy that was going to save the government billions of dollars that could pay for so many other programs and will, but there was so much stacked against it in terms of the private interests. And what seniors on Medicare had was AARP with an army of $8 million to lobby against pharma. And so I just see it as almost like you have two levels. The first is building a movement, but then it's sustaining it. And I think that's a whole other challenge in terms of like getting people to believe in the democratic process, to participate, getting them excited, getting them to sacrifice time to work towards a better future, a better day for all of us, better health. But then when I think about, okay, there is this whole other, almost like if you have two armies, right? You have the army of advocates, but then you have this whole other army that needs to be there to get them across the finish line, which is equipping them with strategy, with appropriate messaging, with access, and financing them, right? Like who is our AARP for everyone on the ACA or private insurance? So those are just some things as well. It's there is so much in terms of thinking about the heart of things, everything that binds us together to want to participate in these movements. And then there's like this whole other, okay, this is realistically as well what you need in terms of your tools, your equipment to get it done. So that's what was going through my mind.
What she said. I think without real investment in narrative change infrastructure, movement infrastructure, and the courage to we actually have the money. It's just scattered among all of us. And what we don't do is invest in a common infrastructure to move those things. So I know a lot about the organizing that happens around senior pieces. There's a coalition of, I think it's like 4 different groups that came together, maybe 5, like 10 to 15 years ago around the Older Americans Act initially, and then these pieces. And every year, the congressional budget for what seniors get is negotiated with that coalition. That's the value of going beyond to be a little less turful, to align our interests across those who care about the child tax credit versus direct cash payments versus mental health benefits versus it's the ability to say, to get a system that's built on health and well-being, we need a whole, and we need to show up for each other. So that today it might be about this, and then next week we're all going to show up in this other way. And that shared infrastructure needs to be supported, funded, and connected, coordinated. And I think that's, so I just want to triple click on everything you said.
So this is a conversation of significance, and I love the texture of it. Thank you. In the remaining few hours this morning, we have an opportunity to convert this conversation of significance into shared action, some shared ownership, James, where you began us today. And I think the spirit of this, and our conveners have said this, is let's make sure we talk about how and get quite pragmatic about it. And I will just say about how is that it is also very important, before we begin with how, is to why. Why are we in this? So we don't lose touch of our centering. And I think we've described it. I don't need to describe it again. I have this focus on a potentiation pathway, an arc of realization of the gift of each human. And I like it because it connects so many people and so many strategies into something, but I'm not here to advocate for that. I want us to just make sure we find our why, because whatever may divide us, that which connects us is greater still. So let's root in that. When we've talked about how, we've used the way that this body has spoken about opportunity, infrastructure, and message as the movement elements. I think we have opportunity on the table, and it's here. And there's a sense of moment, ahorita. Let's do something now. So that's the first. Infrastructure, I'm going to suggest that we think a little bit about what we know the infrastructure of movements to be, so that at some point we say, where are we in our data to knowledge to wisdom arc? Where are we in aligning diverse leadership entities behind something common? Where are we in the dollars that are needed to fuel the good work? Where are we in the proof points like Washington State and others that are demonstrating what we want? In other words, go around the horn on what we know about an ecosystem for impact, so that we make sure we've got the whole system there. And then we find our messaging around that. So I'm going to encourage us today to, steeped in our why, to really dedicate ourselves to a how. And I'd like at some point for the Pop Health Roundtable to speak to what it believes it can do and will do, and how open you are to, I think, the distributed leadership that's here in the room. I've heard offers from you, Shama, and others to move bodies of this work forward, so that we honor the Pop Health Roundtable with how you would like to go. And maybe you need more time after lunch today to sort all that out, but that we can create a path forward. That's my hope for us today, so that we do something in this room that's worthy of our lives.
So we're going to use that as our segue. Thank you so much. Yeah, you all can wander back to wherever you would like to continue to sit. Let's use it as a segue. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to spend non-trivial amounts of time in some small group conversations. However, before we do that, we want to make sure everyone has had an opportunity to sort of share their overnight reflections. So we want to give you a moment to like turn to someone nearby. Again, if you end up in a group of 3, that's okay. And we just want to hear like, what are your ahas? Either from overnight or the conversation that got us started. Like what's noodling, what's working on you in the moment? And then we're going to we're going to collect up a little bit of that. And then we're going to shift into doing what was just said, which is let's make sure we're clear in our in our why, and really get into how are we going to do this stuff. Is that fair? So we're going to give you, I don't know, 3-4 minutes for a quick turn to a neighbor. What's something that's working on you from either overnight or this starting conversation? And then we're going to bring you back because then we're going to really sort of get into, okay, what does it mean for us collectively? Is the task clear? Yep, go for it. So I am super excited that there are unfinished conversations because I would like to bring them into the room. Like we don't have to have tidied them up in our small groups. We can bring some into the room. So Fisher, if you can start identifying things, anybody wants to say something from online, that'd be great. And can I start here in this unfinished conversation, like about where you were in that conversation? Do you want me to wait? Can we start? I mean, any of you are welcome. Can we start? Like, what was animating where you were in the discussion over here?
Yeah, we had so following from yesterday's conversation, we started with, well, we this whole session is around shifting investments and keeping an eye on the North Star of what we are shifting investments to is really critical because population health is a very broad concept. And we talked a little bit about the extent to which, well, there actually are a lot of very well developed frameworks that tell us, and we have an very strong evidence base around what needs to be invested in. So this brought us back to Shoma's comments around really thinking about what it looks like to organize very, very fundamentally differently together so that we are able to shift those investments. And I want Rick to speak to some beautiful things that he brought up around the interior practice that's involved in that.
I'll briefly say I was really taken by the opening reflective conversation, and the first word we heard I think was love, or one of the first words, and so Tyler and the rest came here today after some inner reflection, and so I think that we have plenty, we have abundance, we have funders, we have frameworks, we have organizers, we have technologies to frame and make the case. And I think what we need to do is find those spaces where we can cultivate our inner conditions that allow us to shift the exterior conditions in the ways that we deeply want to do together. And it's different for every person, but one thing we didn't hear is about what happened a couple of hours before, our group of 4 came into the room. What did they do to bring themselves into the room in the way they did? Yeah. Go ahead.
Well, and I took it in a different direction. I'm new to this container that we're in. So I immediately go, we are big thinkers and we're doers. So how do we operationalize this? I don't know how you will operationalize it, but I immediately went to how are we doing that in Washington? What are we already doing? How do we add to it? Shoma said something about grass tops to grassroots, and that's exactly where we're going. We're building an agenda with secretaries, with community action agencies, and most importantly, centering lived expertise in what's next for our state when we're talking about well-being, whether it's health equity, economic equity, racial equity, environmental justice equity, it all impacts the same communities. So how are we doing that collectively across the whole continuum? So that's where I was going.
Thank you. How about on this side? Somebody want to invite? Yeah.
So I ended up monopolizing the whole discussion in our group.
Oh.
Sorry.
Oh,
One thing that was really helpful that we ended up talking about was, the difficulties of trying to do this yourself. I have this idea that is, I think this is we've got the opportunity, the infrastructure and the message that let's do it. But the infrastructure has to involve other people. We can't do this as sort of a lone, war analogies are so bad, a lone individual going out against a group of other people, right? So we look for those like-minded people, even in settings that may be challenging to do it in, before we try to make the progress individually on our own. There's that proverb, right? If you want to go fast, go alone, go far, go together. And so that was really helpful for me to be reminded of this morning.
thank you. Out over here.
So children sort of has been what I was noodling about a lot. And that sort of got pushed forward some more. I glanced at an article in the New York Times last night that suggested that Republicans like children too. And I was really heartened to hear that. So I thought that might be at least a strategy. I was thinking about, so what do you do with children? I mean, what are the things that need to happen to children? And Sandy comes earlier into this. I want her to sort of talk about that. But I was thinking about, again, as I said yesterday, about the arts, and I was thinking about music, and different songs came to my mind, and I just want to say them so that, people understand. Actually, the one that just came this morning was Love, 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 All You Need Is Love. So I think that could be a sort of an anthem. But I was thinking about Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, who talk about teach your children well and let them dream. And I was thinking about a much older song from South Pacific about you've got to be carefully taught. And it's a song about racism that was written in the early 50s. And it made me think that really the educational sector needs to be deeply our partner in all of this. And that's where I would sort of start to reach out to.
I would just say, Martha always reminds me about another language that we often don't bring into these spaces of, plays. She's a playwright. And so plays and music, and when do we bring those in? And yet that's a universal language that others speak and resonate to, and talk about changing hearts and minds. And where are we using that tool?
Great, thanks. Over here.
This is Jennifer Bearskin. So I'm coming in from somebody who's on the ground, who's directly impacted by all of these policies. And so for me, I try to think about, well, what could we do? What could make things easier for me? What could help ensure that my community will thrive and that my son is going to have a chance at escaping poverty? I hold 38 years of poverty. That's all I know. I don't know if I'll ever escape poverty, but I am willing to live in poverty for the rest of my life if that means that my son will never have to go homeless. He'll never have to go hungry. He'll never have to sleep in the car. He'll never have to, go from couch to couch or have to deal with state care, because I have to tell you, being on Medicare, Medicaid, I just got a text message that said, oh, you can't get into this doctor because we don't have access. It's going to be 6+ month wait. Like, these are the realities that our people are living with right now. And so if you're in a position of power and privilege and influence, how are you going to be able to use that to uplift our people, uplift my son, and recognize that, you know, for our community, we don't make friends, we make relations. So it's not just my child, it's your child, your grandchild, your children and your grandchildren who aren't even here, is to think about that. You know, for us in our community, greed was a crime. Greed was a crime because if you were greedy, you were going to kill your entire community. And so when we think about this country, what is this country? How is the policies designed to ensure that generational wealth is removed from like the first people, the people who were enslaved, who were taken from their homes and had their culture removed and their language removed? All of those things are people who are immigrants who also built this country and who are still not even considered human beings. So what can you guys do in your power to uplift those of us who are on the ground? Because I don't, you know, I'm still going through school. I still have a ways before I can get to a point where I can continue to uplift my community. I just say that, you know, I've really appreciated being here today and having this opportunity to hopefully change your heart, your hachusara, the intelligence of your mind, because our intelligence of our mind is not here. This tells us to blink, to breathe, to make sure we can drink water. This is where the change comes, is in your hachusara, in your hutch. And so I know that it's really easy to just go right back into, this is the status quo, this is the system, but this is the time to change that, because I'm going to go home and I'm still going to be suffering after this. It's just something I want you guys to carry and think about. What can I do for actions? How can I connect with the community? What do I need to do to push out of my comfort zone and acknowledge what can I do to grow? So that's all I have to say.
Thank you. Okay, over here.
I was going to tell a joke, but I don't think the timing is right. Maybe it is. I'm so feeling Martha's vibe. In the movie Michael, they're starting to figure out that he's divine, and they're driving in the car. Michael's played by John Travolta, and he says, "It all comes down to John and Paul." And they say, "You mean the apostles?" And he says, No, the Beatles. All you need is love. And they start singing in the car, the whole car. I think the vast majority of this comes down to better primary care in America. Many people who aren't alive now spent their careers trying to do something about primary care in America. And as an economist, it's pretty simple that we have to figure out a way within the structures that we have to pay primary care doctors more, especially who care for disadvantaged populations. I have ideas about how that might happen, but that's not what matters. I think what matters is that what are we going to do about this? We've been looking at these surveys for 30 years about this is the missing link in America. Insufficient primary care to way too many people in America without a usual source of care.
Okay. Oh, wait. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm actually struggling with the question of what is the what that Tyler put, and I think back to Dr. T's opening comment yesterday, which totally resonated for me, that you know that almost all of the energy that we can summon needs to go into thinking about building the political and public will to change, I think is exactly what you said. And then grounded further by Jennifer, by your comments just now. So I think, and I'm enriched by this whole conversation yesterday and today. And so really I don't have something clarifying to say, except that I don't think we're at yet, a point I'm not sure anyone could articulate the what that we're even working towards in a way that we all feel like, oh yeah, no, that you just named it. That sounds like the right thing. So
I think our next person can give us a little bit of
Fantastic.
I don't know if it's going to answer the question, but I think provide a little bit more clarity for about how we might answer that question. So Hillary, would you be willing to share your?
I don't know if it's clarity, like I have the answer, and I mean, that's certainly not the case, but I'll share the sort of the next sort of question that I've been sitting with coming in this morning, and then as we've been talking. And a lot of what we've been doing is like raising a powerful question after powerful question. And on one hand, you might look at that and say, those are just, this is just navel gazing. This is just a bunch of people, sitting in a fancy room talking to each other. But also, I really think that like deliberate, thoughtful, like powerful questions building on each other can build into something that makes a difference if you're continue to be deliberate, intentional about it. So one of the things I've been sitting with is this idea that we've been saying, I'm going to say things we've already been saying. I'm not saying anything new. That so much is happening across the country already. So there's so many sort of assets and like superpowers discovered and undiscovered and like efforts and things building in so many places. And so when I asked this question, kind of like what Mark pointed to, of like, what does it mean needs to happen? What does it mean we should do? What does it mean needs to happen? The way I want to frame it, one of the ways I want to frame it is what needs to be woven together, what needs to be lifted up and powered so that we can start to add up and build like movement towards this sort of future that we're imagining together, in which all children are able to reach their full potential, is one of the ways it's been characterized repeatedly, and a few other ways over the course of this. So the question, I'll put forward is, I mean, I don't know if we'll spend time today to do it or not, but it makes me want to think about what are the things already happening and for opportunity, infrastructure, and message, but not just message, but we're talking about something more than message. It's like narrative change, mindsets about this, to go to some of, for example, what Rick was highlighting. So what are the things already happening and taking shape, and how can we power them and weave them in a way that gets us heading in the kinds of directions that we're feeling?
So Shoma's going to say something, and then I want to tee up sort of where we go next in our conversation.
Some of you might know that I spend a significant part of my life thinking about equitable data and measurement and things like well-being and what's the goal. I feel very clear after these 2 days about what the goal is. Jennifer just said it. The goal is, what would it take for Jennifer's children not to experience the poverty that she has had to be resilient through? What would it take for Jennifer's wisdom and leadership to be expressed in the world in a way that what she brings from her culture, the idea that greed is a crime, something that we might help all of the rest of this country's culture if we were to embrace that, for that to be a norm in the world. And maybe if we stop thinking about the goal in terms that are so academic, and don't get me wrong, I have all kinds of things that I value in terms of data and measurement. But I think maybe what we need to do is get a little bit more grounded and clear and simple and more powerful in the question that we're answering, and use that as a North Star to say, what would that take? And not where are we coming from? What are the position pieces we have? What would we like for our constituencies? But to work backward from the question to ask, what would that take? What would need to shift for whom? Who would need to move in what message? What policies would need to shift? And then align our collective assets, power, and privilege to be able to do that. To me, that's creating the conditions for real love to be realized in the world.
Just add to that. You know, one thing to think about also is, in order to get to that North Star, what are we going to stop doing? What are we going to stop doing in meetings like this? What are we going to stop doing in meetings like this? I think that requires a deeper reflection, to not go back to our comfort zones, which kind of subtly happens still in conversations.
So as was pointed out, it's on the agendas, it's on the sign as we walk in. It's the title of this symposium, which is about shifting investments. What I think I'm hearing is, before we could talk about shifting the investments of the payers, we need to shift the investment of our time and attention of the people in this room, which requires a stop. Like, a shifting means I'm going to stop doing some things and redouble and focus on some other things. And so if I were going to tee up what, it would be like, what does it look like? Sorry, here's the question. Here's a framing that we use in our leadership approach. How do we work together differently? How would we work together differently in order to shift our time and attention and our investments, so that we have now organized ourselves around the key question of human potential and/or ensuring that, I won't pick on yours, I'll talk like the next version of young, gifted, and Black James, right? Doesn't have to grow up in poverty. Like, what do we do? How do we shift our attention? How do we shift our investments of our attention and our time, our weaving, so that we are organized to help shift the other investments in the systems? Like that may be a way of framing the question. That's 40% of our kids. But here's the thing, like, it is 40% of our kids, and it's 100% of somebody's kids, right? Like, it's 40% of our kids collectively. And when it's your kid, it's 100%. Like, that's a thing. All like all the little, like all the little kids, right? And so, yeah, like it's a big percent. It's a big thing. So I'd love for us to find ourselves back into our small groups. You can get new ones. Ray has a thought. I'm coming to you, Ray. Go ahead.
Before we do that, can we get some flavor of what's going on online?
Sure.
Because this has been very much focused among us here, and I'm at this point kind of wondering what are the reactions, what are the thoughts, what's going on out there that might enrich the discussion further.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Ray.
So yeah, on the screen, and I know Willa has something that maybe you want to share, Willa, and then if anybody else online, and Maggie, is it possible maybe pull up the chat and scroll through it a little bit? But Willa, if you want to share a comment.
Can you hear me?
Can
you guys hear me?
We absolutely.
Okay, greetings everyone. Hello, my name is Willa. My real last name is really True Love. So what I was talking about in the chat is we need to start with this room, and we need to start with the function and the process. And maybe would help some people to say, okay, we need a vision of this, but what it really is a function. So I'm asking you guys a question because, we need the eyes. This is a democracy. If there are buttons behind the jam book where people have placed comments in these meetings that are very current, we need a centralized place to be able to go to and continue these conversations, because there's this extraordinary positive amount of energy that is radiating from all of these meetings that I'm going to, and I'm sure you too. And we need ways to preserve this, to archive the work that everyone is doing, and to move it fast. You need something that is like an HTTP that you can send to your friend and say, look, I went to this meeting, look at all these papers here. Then we're building evidence. We need to, this meeting has a chat. How did it get a chat? So we need to think about how we deliver what we're talking to. Like, you guys are discounting your work and the work that you do. We don't have to keep spinning this wheel. It's done. Let's put the upload in. People put the articles in, the videos in. It strengthens your case. I went to the GM meeting. I'm not going to take much time this morning, and they want something like this. The scientists and regular people, social service people, I assist people with disabilities. We need to be unsiloed now. These conversations need to germinate, they need to grow, and they need to move. And that's what we need, a way to move these conversations so that they can continue.
Thanks, Willa. And in chat, Willa has been sharing lots of pretty practical things that could sort of support this kind of work. And then it looks like maybe Beverly, do we have time for Beverly? You wanna come on?
Good morning. My name is Beverly Rogers, and I just want to say that this morning I woke up sad from yesterday. And the reason I woke up sad is I started to think I am an 81-year-old African-American woman who has lived from Jim Crow to Black Lives Matter. And I live in an active senior community, and we're all struggling with, we've heard all of these things before. We've raised our children through these things. And I've been to PCORI meetings, I've been to CTAC meetings, I've been to the primary, the PCC meetings, and everyone is energized when they're in the sessions. But when they leave, the seniors are still paying $300 for 0.5 milliliters of eye drops for cataract. Who else gets cataract? But we're paying $300 for them. Where is the movement? I love hearing the talk. I love hearing the energy, but we need some work going on for those of us who are still in the trenches trying to make it every day.
Thank you, Beverly.
That's my soapbox.
No, it's
Quite a soapbox.
That's a good one.
Good soapbox. And thank you, Ray, for pausing us. The facilitator, sometimes I do get focused on the time and making sure that we invite other people to use the time, right? That is a use of power. Make sure that we extend power and equity to people who are not in this room. So thank you for that. So I have a question for those of us in the space. I actually have an answer to this question. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to pause for our break. We're going to then come back and go to work. And here's the thing. When we leave today, we need to have an answer for Jennifer's kid, for Beverly, for the future little Jameses. Like, we want to make sure we walk out of here with how would we answer this question for them? In terms of what are we going to do differently? in order to move this forward? How are we going to shift our attention, our organizing, in order to make sure that the other investments shift in a way to be responsive to those needs? All right, so it is 5 minutes until 10 o'clock right now. Let's call it a 15-minute break. If we can be back at 10 after, that would be great. Thank you. See you then.